Hello, and welcome to A Life with Culture. I'm St. John Flynn. Geneva Beane, or Neva to her family and friends, is the protagonist of a new novel, The True Definition of Neva Beane, just published by Scholastic Press. This is the second book by Philadelphia-based children's author Christine Kendall, and she joins me now. Christine Kendall, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Congratulations on the publication of The True Definition of Neva Beane.
Thank you. It was a long time coming. The book actually took longer to write than I had hoped.
Give us the brief synopsis, a brief overview of who Neva Beane is and what this book is about.
Yes. Neva Beane is a 12-year-old girl living in West Philadelphia. She knows that she's beautiful and she knows that she's smart, but she's experienced a lack of self-confidence, mainly for two reasons. One is that her body is changing. She's changing from a little girl into a young teen. And secondly, because her parents, who are musicians, are in Europe for the summer on a tour, and she feels lost without her mother. And so Neva is left at home with her very traditional grandparents, as well as her older brother, Clayton. And the grandparents believe that they need to protect Neva and Clay. And one of the things that they believe they need to protect them from is political activism, being too much involved in the political activities occurring in their neighborhood. So the household descends into intergenerational turmoil, and Neva is basically left with her dictionary, which is the one thing that is sort of her comfort object. She likes words. She likes to think about words that she uses, as well as words that other people throw around to come to understand what they really mean. And in the process, Neva comes to define herself.
And as you say, words are so important to Neva. And in fact, the novel is told in the first person, isn't it?
Right, yes. I thought that was a way to just bring the reader closer to Neva.
And also, it's a great way to showcase her love of words, because she, these are her words that she's using. What is the significance of the words to Neva?
Yes, Neva, well, in the very beginning, there's a phrase that she recounts that she just doesn't understand. She and her grandmother are in a department store, and a sales clerk says something to them like, a woman without a fragrance is a woman without a future. And Neva realizes this is just absurd. So the words are how she interprets and chronicles what's happening in her world, as well as how she just figures things out. And in the book, each chapter begins with a word which sort of acts as a frame for the story.
Because she's looking for self-definition, isn't she? She's looking to come to a conclusion as to who she is, what she is, and how she can function in the world.
Absolutely. And it's very important to her that she define herself as opposed to being defined by others. And so really it's a question of identity. And I think that's an issue that most of us have dealt with at some point in our lives.
You mentioned Clay, her older brother. I think he's 16.
Right.
And he and Neva have a good relationship. They have a good relationship. But of course, he is older and he has blossomed. He has come into his own and is going out into the world, isn't he?
Right, absolutely. He's allowed greater freedoms because he is older than Neva, and also because he is a boy.
You mentioned that the grandparents want to keep Neva and Clay out of the troubles they might fall into particularly through Clay's political activism. And one of the events in the story is this March for Justice that the community is organizing. Tell us about Clay's involvement and what the aims of the march are.
Yes, Clay is concerned because he doesn't believe that anyone in their household is woke, to use his word. And he feels badly about that. He feels, and he knows that their family is somewhat privileged. They're a middle-class family. They have their own house. They have good educational opportunities and so on. But he knows that others don't, specifically his friend, Anton. Anton is a younger boy in the neighborhood whose brother, is unfortunately in prison. And Anton is collecting books to send to his brother in prison. And Clay sees this and relates very much to Anton's troubles. So his ideas about social justice and so on are not far off things that he doesn't know anything about, really. He sees what's happening with his friend Anton. And he also sees what's happening in the larger community, the issues of homelessness and food scarcity and so on. And he's very, very concerned about that. So he actually becomes one of the youth organizers for this March for Justice. And unfortunately, he gets involved without getting the permission from his grandparents, who are his guardians over the course of the summer.
He makes a mistake, doesn't he, with regard to that?
He makes a big mistake. He makes a big mistake in that regard. And so it actually shows, though, that Clay, I believe, is a three-dimensional character like all the other characters in the book. You know, he's very concerned about social justice issues, but he makes a mistake which very badly disrupts his relationship with his grandmother.
I think one of the interesting things about the book is that Neva's grandparents they're fully three-dimensional as well. You know, they have their foibles,
right?
But also back in the day, they were involved in the social justice movements of their time,
right?
But now things are different, and there is a sense that with a new generation, there's a new preoccupation that maybe older people feel that they've been left behind.
Yeah, there's definitely that issue in the book, especially on the part of the grandmother, who is getting older and starting to experience some health issues. And honestly, she doesn't believe that she can participate in marches anymore as she has done in the past, and she's struggling with that. But the grandfather is also involved in the community in other ways. So that's one of the things I wanted to show in the book, that there are various ways of being involved in your community. One can do more than march. One can serve the community in many other ways. And I think the grandfather does that. And I don't want to spoil the novel by telling people exactly what it is he's doing, but it shows that there are various ways to be a progressive, positive person in your community.
One of the dilemmas for Neva is the march and whether or not she should become involved in it. She has a friend across the street, Michelle, who is a year or two older than her, but is really encouraging her to get involved. But Neva has some reticence, doesn't she?
Right, absolutely. Neva is fascinated by Michelle. Michelle is a few years older than she is. She's more sophisticated, partially because her father is a community organizer. And Michelle is very much a part of the community in terms of organizing the other kids and standing up in front of groups and speaking. And Neva is fascinated by that and somewhat intimidated. And it takes her a while to figure out why that is. And it's because Michelle has claimed her power, something that Neva hasn't done.
And also, I think there's an interesting distinction between Michelle and Neva, and that is body image.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because Neva looks at Michelle and she sees a more mature, young woman.
Yes.
And she has not reached that level yet, has she?
No, absolutely not. And Michelle is experimenting in her dress, and sometimes dresses what the grandmother would define as provocatively. And she has the community upset about her dress in more than one instance. And so Neva doesn't quite understand what's going on with that until she later realizes that Michelle is experimenting. She's trying to figure out who she is through dressing in different ways and presenting herself in different ways. And we all learn that you can't judge someone based on their appearance, or you shouldn't judge them by the way that they dress. but it's an issue that Neva struggles with throughout the book.
What about Neva's relationship with Jamila, who is perhaps her closest friend?
Mm-hmm.
Jamila's father is from Ghana,
Right.
and her mother is presumably from Philly.
Mm-hmm.
But Neva and Jamila have their ups and downs.
Yes. Neva and Jamila are best friends, and they generally spend every day of the summer together. And the families also know one another and do some family activities together. But Jamila does not have this fascination with Michelle that Neva does.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Jamila feels a little more confident about herself in terms of her body. She's not going through the same issues of a lack of confidence that Neva is experiencing. And so there's a rift between the two friends because of that.
You paint a picture of a very close-knit community where Neva's grandparents are in contact with Jamila's parents, for example,
right?
As well as obviously with Neva's mother and father. There is a sense of people looking out for the kids.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's absolutely a sense of community. And I think that's what I see here in my neighborhood. You know, I live here in West Philadelphia, and this is where the story takes place. And there is very much a sense of community. I see kids out in the neighborhood doing things. And oh my goodness, during the summertime, there are block parties where the blocks are, traffic is blocked. And so there's kids out there playing, adults, and everyone is invited to participate. So it is very much a reflection of the neighborhood here.
Is that where you grew up?
We lived in this neighborhood for a short period of time. I think I was between the ages of 5 and 11 when we lived here in West Philadelphia.
Has it changed much?
It's hard for me to say because when we left, I was just 11 years old and we went away and I came back just 4 years ago. But I believe the answer is yes, but I can't actually attest to the steps in that process because I wasn't here for a lot of that time.
Right. I mentioned in my introduction that you are a children's author. Mm-hmm. How would you describe yourself? Is that accurate?
Well, that's a good question. I write for both children as well as adults, but my first book was a middle grade novel entitled Riding Chance, and now this book, The True Definition of Neva Beane, have both been children's books published by Scholastic. And I sort of fell into writing middle grade novels. I actually had a long career in law firm management. And up until about 10 years ago, I was very pleased with that. But then I started to feel like I wanted to do something more creative. So I took a big risk and left my law firm job and said I was going to write children's picture books. So I thought that I was going to be writing things like Where the Wild Things Are and The Very Hungry Caterpillar, because I've always loved those picture books. But I just happened to hear about a story on the radio one morning about kids here in Philadelphia's Fairmount Park who were playing polo. And back in 2011, they won this national polo championship. I thought it was an unbelievable story. And once I heard of that story, I thought, wow, I want to write about this. And so I said, I'm going to write a story. I went to writing workshops. I started writing that novel, and the rest is history, as they say.
That's your first novel, Riding Chance?
Yes, Riding Chance.
Writing for children, writing for, you're not writing for an audience of your own age. You're writing for children. How do you approach that? How do you know what is appropriate in terms of language and theme, etc.?
Yeah, that's another very good question. It's something that I worried about initially because I don't have children and I'm not really around children very often. You know, I have nieces and nephews, but they're adults at this point. So it's a matter of paying attention when you're out and about in the world, listening to how children talk, observing how they are with one another. For instance, when I was writing Riding Chance, which is a story about a young boy's search for identity. I used to go to the skateboard park close to where I was living at the time and watching the young boys there on their skateboards, to see the swagger and all that stuff. And I also have to say, having grown up with 4 brothers helped me to pull up this young boy's voice. But I guess another thing that I've realized is, even though I'm not a child myself, I was a child at some point. So I can still remember some of the concerns, even though what children have to deal with in today's world is quite different from things that I dealt with years ago, but not entirely. And so you can search within yourself, do a lot of reading, observing, listening to come up with that child's voice.
What were the books that you read when you were a child?
That's an interesting question. I didn't really read children's books when I was a child. And I think one of the reasons why I didn't do that is because there weren't many children's books out there that really appealed to me, because the characters didn't look anything like me or didn't share many of my same experiences. So when I think about books that I loved, or books that had an impact on me when I was a much younger person, I'm thinking about James Baldwin. That's sort of where it starts for me.
Yes. That's a great place to start.
Yes, a great place to start. I did read as a child because my mother took us to the library every week. You borrowed a book, you read it, you took it back, you borrowed another book. But I can't really recall the titles of those books, and I always found that really interesting.
Obviously, you do a lot of work with school children.
Mm-hmm.
How have they reacted to the true definition of Neva Beane? What has surprised you about their reactions?
Yeah. It's interesting that they can see themselves in Neva. And that I will make an admission here, that first mirror scene in the book where Neva is admiring herself and is seen by one of her brothers, or seen by her brother, actually did happen to me. And it was a humiliating experience. And so when I'm talking to kids about that experience, very often there are at least one or more girls in the audience who actually says, that happened to me too. So.
Because Neva has just gotten her first bra, hasn't she?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And very proud of herself and wants to admire herself.
And I think that's one of the lovely things about Neva, is that you can see that there is this budding confidence there. Mm-hmm. She's just looking for the right way to define it and to express it.
Right, absolutely, yes. And through her love of words, it comes about, especially at the end of the story, where there's been this rift between she and her best friend, Jamila, and Neva's trying to figure out how to repair the relationship, and it's through words that she actually is able to do that.
Do you see Neva appearing in any other of your novels?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I love her as a character, but I don't know if she will go on to appear in other novels.
Of course, she's in terms of age-specific books, she's sort of at the top of the middle school grade level. Right. So she might need to go into more young adult fiction. Absolutely. Is that something that you've contemplated?
It's funny, when I first started writing, I didn't realize how connected you become to your characters. It takes you a couple of years, or it takes me a couple of years to write a book. And so the characters are living with you for that period of time. It's almost like they're right here in the room with you. And so when I finished my first novel, which took me 3 years, I grieved when the book was finished, because the characters weren't right here with me anymore. Because when I was in the midst of that writing, sometimes I'd be out on the street, I would expect to see my protagonist, Troy, when I stepped around the corner. It was that real to me. And I have had the same experience with Neva Beane. I love Neva Beane. I love her name. And so she's gone from me now. And so I'm missing her a little bit, but I don't know if she'll show up again in other books.
Well, she's never far from you, because all you have to do is sit down and start writing again. Are you working on a new novel now?
Yes, I have started a new novel, but honestly, I'm having a hard time focusing. But I have started a new novel. It's another middle grade story. And I think this one will again have male protagonists, two twin 8-year-old boys. And we'll see where I go with that.
So let me ask you a final question. If you had to sum up, or if Neva had to sum up herself in one word, what would that word be?
Magnificent. That's Neva.
And that's one that you know she's looked up in the dictionary many times.
Exactly, right. And one that most kids may not use, but Neva Beane uses that word.
But Christine, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. It was great to read the book, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. This was really a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining me. For more from the world of arts and culture, please like and subscribe, and join me again next time. I'm St. John Flynn, and this is A Life with Culture.